Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I hope you're all having a good weekend. Today's episode is a little bit shorter than usual. I am once again on business this weekend, on a business trip, so more limited time, but there are several key developments that we do need to touch on, so let's just dive in. And let's begin briefly with the outbreak situation, which continues to intensify into the weekend. The following days will be critical as we will learn just how many infections Beijing will tolerate with this newer, more eased form of zero COVID, which should in turn help us forecast just how close to opening up the country really is. Lockdowns and restrictions of varying degrees are currently affecting dozens of cities and hundreds of millions of residents. In some areas, for example parts of western China's Xinjiang, lockdowns have been in place for over 100 days. The megacities of Guangzhou, Chongqing and the capital, Beijing, represent the most concerning outbreaks. The manufacturing center of Guangzhou, home to the world's largest iPhone assembly plant of recent infamy, is also seeing daily cases in the thousands. The city's health authorities announced this week that they are investigating the case of a 4-month-old child who died at a quarantine site, the latest in a string of deaths linked to strict implementation of zero-COVID policies, which has sparked anger online. Yesterday, Beijing advised residents of its wealthy and prosperous Chaoyang district to, quote, stay put during the weekend to curb COVID spikes, end quote. One of the Beijing municipal officials added, quote, the occasional staying put approach is a good way to cut off virus transmission as soon as possible and protect the health of us all, end quote. The city is ramping up booster vaccinations to prevent a further spike of the virus, offering CanSino Biologics Inc.'s inhaled COVID vaccine in nearly all of the capital's 16 districts. Meanwhile, and speaking of vaccinations on the national level, experts this week are still debating whether there should be a wider rollout of booster vaccinations. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai writes, for example, that China's booster vaccination campaign is slowing. Quote, the country began offering booster shots to residents in the second half of 2021. The booster rate rose to 40.1% in February this year and reached 55% in July. As of the 7th of October, the booster rate was only 57%, which basically means the drive has stalled in the past few months. End quote. New daily cases across the country are now in the tens of thousands. More than 25,000 local COVID cases were announced on Thursday, the highest daily tally since late April, when Shanghai, as we all remember, was under a 2-month lockdown. Next up, let's move through a few diplomatic developments. Britain's new Prime Minister has made it clear how his government views the UK-China relationship, advocating the maintenance of the previous general Anglophone bloc position of general competition with the People's Republic of China. This week, UK Prime Minister Sunak told Parliament, quote, I believe that our approach to China is aligned entirely with that of the United States and indeed our other allies. Of course, China poses significant challenges. It is also right to engage in dialogue. End quote. This week at the G20, a meeting between China's Xi and the British Prime Minister, scheduled for Wednesday, was cancelled due to, quote, scheduling issues, end quote, according to the British side. Chinese state media had a different explanation, however. Quote, Chinese experts believe that it is possible that the cancellation is a way for China to express its strong dissatisfaction with Britain's recent provocations on the Taiwan question. Western politicians have to act realistically. Western countries, including the US and Britain, still need China, especially in solving economic and social problems. End quote. This week too, the head of Britain's MI5 issued another warning regarding China, expressing, quote, the activities of the Chinese Communist Party pose the most game-changing strategic challenge to the UK. End quote. Now moving from one island nation to another island nation, but on the other side of the Eurasian landmass, at the APEC summit in Bangkok, Thailand this week, General Secretary Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida had their first in-person meeting as leaders. The PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced yesterday, Friday, that the two leaders were able to reach a consensus to, quote, move quickly to open a more direct phone line under the maritime and air liaison mechanism, end quote, as part of a 5-point concession plan. The establishment of this de-escalation mechanism has become especially needed amid heightened regional tensions in the Taiwan Strait and East China Sea, both major potential flashpoints in East Asia, and particularly within Sino-Japanese relations. The maritime and air liaison mechanism between the two nations' defense departments was first established in 2018 and is aimed at averting accidental clashes in the air and at sea. Next up, dire warnings from some of China's top economic policymakers. Hey guys, if you like what I'm trying to do here with China Update and you'd like to help keep China Update sustainable, I rely primarily on subscriber support to keep the channel going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. If you like today's episode in particular, don't forget to hit that like button. And as always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Okay, and finally for today's video, this week China has held its 13th Caixin Summit, an event which brings some of China's top economic decision makers together to discuss critical economic and financial related challenges facing the country. Yesterday, Friday, Liu Shijin, member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the People's Bank of China, speaking at the summit, warned that China urgently needs to get its economy back on track with at least 5% growth next year, adding that, quote, this situation cannot continue, end quote. We remember that Beijing had set a GDP growth goal of around 5.5% at the beginning of this year, but no one, especially Chinese leadership, expect China to reach that this year. 3% of debt-fueled unhealthy growth is more likely. Liu warned that China's economy is moving through a rocky transition, which will magnify existing difficulties and risks, but that growth must be sustained. Otherwise, the result will be long-term stagnation. This is very blunt and pessimistic language for a top Chinese technocrat speaking at such a public forum. Liu also admitted that the challenge set by the 20th Party Congress to, quote, reach the per capita income level of a medium-developed country by 2035, end quote, is, quote, very difficult, end quote. Also on Friday, Yang Weimin, a member of the country's top political consultative body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, told the 13th Caixin Summit audience, quote, the greatest risk in economic development these days is the too slow growth rate, end quote, adding, quote, this trend must be reversed, end quote. Otherwise, as Liu warns, China will slip into Japan-style stagnation. Of course, on top of zero-COVID policies, one of the biggest headwinds to Chinese growth this year has been the property crisis, which was in part due to regulatory crackdown for fears that the sector was too big, too bloated, and too unsustainable. Thus, maintaining high growth rates is one thing, but maintaining healthy high growth rates is another, and both are easier said than done. Okay, that is today's episode, slightly shorter episode of China Update. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all on Monday.